Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So great to see so many faces I know and some new faces, and thank you so much for giving up your time to come and share my inaugural lecture tonight. So, the connected jungle and the digital tree. What does that mean? So there's three things I want to cover tonight. One is, what does that mean, looking at your digital tree and the analog tree? What's the impact of social media on you? And the future. Who is using your data that you're feeding into the network? So, when I was asked to do the inaugural lecture, it must have been over a year ago, I was in my office and a PhD student was there, junior. I was telling him all about the things we've done over the years. And I said, I just cannot come up with a catchy title. He said, well, if you think about the corporate jungle, this is very much like a connected jungle. I thought, brilliant. We are all connected within this jungle, either via analog or via digital. And within this jungle, we have a digital tree. And what makes up your digital tree is either email, tweets, Facebook, text, anything digital. But also, you've got an analog tree. So that might be all the things that keep in your brain. It might be anything that's written down on paper. And the complexity is trying to navigate your way through this digital jungle. There's lots of information out there. How do you find out the right information for you to complete a task? And if you think about large organizations, maybe like some of the banks, where they have over 350,000 employees, trying to actually find the right information without having to duplicate it and little pockets of silos is very complex. My question to you is, when you're thinking about your digital tree, which we all have one now, does it worry you that that's maybe exposed to others across the world so they can see what you're up to? Analog tree is somewhat restricted and you can't really see that, but the digital tree is open to all. So how does that change in terms of business? Does that add complexity that you've got a digital tree and an analog tree to navigate? Up here on the slide here, you can see a picture from Facebook. This actually shows all the connections of Facebook account users in the world. So that's just Facebook. That's pretty much all the globe. There's a few major countries missing, but if you start adding Twitter or Weibo, you start to get a nice picture of the whole Earth and how it's actually connected digitally. So the complex digital age, is it complex? If you think about our students that go into the workplace, it is complex, I think. You've got all this employee knowledge. They need to try and tap into the right people. Who knows what? And we'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. You've got lots of processes and systems. Some of them are quite antiquated. The systems have been in place since the company started. They've never really replaced them. They're not really fit for purpose, but they just muddle along, just keep going. Then when you're trying to find information, you've got the internet. So you've got about 4 billion pages of information out there to try and sift through. So information retrieval is quite key. On top of that, you've got about 54 gigabytes of unstructured data to sift through in any one organization. So trying to find the right information can be quite complex. So let's take the brain. So, how many bytes of information does a brain hold? Any ideas in terms of bytes? We're talking megabytes, talking terabytes. I'll put you out your misery. Based on the number of junctions between neurons, brain contains about 100 billion neurons. So each has about 20,000 shared synaptic junctions. So if we think of those as being a bit, a brain can hold between 100 and 1,000 terabytes of information. So if we think about the analog, that's an awful lot of information that an organization potentially holds. So trying to find the right person with that information is difficult, and trying to elicit that information is even harder. Let's put it into context. So 1,000 terabytes. You can go home tonight and tell people all around you that your brain is the size of a forest. So how do I get that calculation? 1 terabyte is about 50,000 trees made into paper and printed. So if we go for 1,000 terabytes, we're looking at 50 million trees. So your brain is the size of 50 million trees. I'm looking at Chris here, smiling. So in terms of the Amazon, there's 4 billion trees in the Amazon rainforest. So we need about 8,000 people to make up that rainforest. So trying to navigate through, if you think the size of the Amazon is huge, trying to navigate through that is complex. So even though we think the digital world is complex, the analog world is still complex. And over the years, we've done lots of work on knowledge management research, but we're not going to put much of that in here tonight, just to let you know it does exist. So I don't know if you've ever seen these before. Colleagues in SBE would have seen these many a time. This is what happens every 60 seconds around the globe. So if we look at the top right-hand corner, up here, we've got 98,000 tweets sent every minute. We have 25 hours of YouTube video uploaded every minute. I'm sure that's not Eloise that does all that. And in terms of email, there are, I think, 168 million emails every 60 seconds. That's phenomenal amounts of information. That's 2012. Forget that, we'll move on. So we've gone from 25 hours of YouTube video up to 72 hours of YouTube video uploaded. We've introduced Google searches, so we have 2 million Google searches every minute. Emails increased to 204 million, and Twitter, or number of tweets, is up to 278,000. So the rate of growth in terms of information is phenomenal. The latest one I could get is this one here. We've gone from 2 million searches to 2.66 million Google searches at the very top. Interestingly, a decrease in email. So from 204 million to 138.8 million. So a slight decrease. And then in terms of tweets, we're now up to 433,000 tweets every minute. Phenomenal. If you just think about those numbers, all that information, where's it going? Where's it being stored? Can it be utilized? Now, when we think about social media, sometimes we think, yes, it's just the young that use social media. Looking at this graph, you see that it's not. At the very top, you can see the different colors, and that represents a different age group, so 0 to 17, 18 to 24. You can see generally there's a very good spread until you get to 65 plus. But of course, as the population is aging all the time and is growing, I expect that to increase even further. So you're getting a good representation, really, of people using social media. The one thing that really surprises me, how things are changing in terms of digital presence. So if you think about the birth of a baby, the digital present now exists 3 months before the analog birth of the baby. And that's because people know the gender of the baby, so they create a website, they have Facebook pages, all to do with that particular baby. So it's just growing all the time. I recommend if you've got time to go and have a look at the nice article on BBC about how big data is changing lives. So the analog and digital tree. I went down to London, to Tower of London. You probably remember this picture from November last year, and took some great pictures of all the poppies, really moving. But it started to make me think about, okay, go back to maybe the First World War, 1914. Did they have a digital tree? No. Did they have an analog tree? Yes, they did. But it's probably tiny, probably about 128K put into a computer, maybe, if you try and put it in computer terms, maybe a year, maybe in the whole lifetime. Move on to 2005, and this is at NBC's one of their shows, and you can see everyone looking at the show that's going to begin, and you can see maybe just 1 or 2 people, I think there's another one somewhere, of someone holding up their mobile phone, taking an image. They want a personalised image of that event, even though it would be on TV. Move to 2013, pretty much everybody out there is trying to take a picture of what's going on. Pretty much all copies of the same image they're taking, but it's just their personalised image for themselves. But what that means is, with the digital age, we are all sensors. We are all putting stuff into the grid. So every text, every tweet, every Facebook post, anything digital, we are putting into that grid. So what does your digital footprint look like? So if you have time, this is how I calculate it. There's a web link at the bottom there. It's quite good to see. So this could be email, Facebook, surveillance cameras, online banking, digital photographs. So I calculated it for myself, and it turns out to be, for a year, or just under a year, 614 gigabytes of information in just 1 year. And you think back to the people in 1914, well, maybe 128K max in a year, maybe in the whole lifetime, if you're trying to put that into digital context. So the rate of information, the growth is phenomenal. And what we're starting to find is, because it's so big, this is where we have big data, what can we do to try and optimize and utilize all this information? So what I want to do is take it right back to basics and look at what can we learn from the oldest social media tool out there, which is email, which is 44 years old. Email was invented by a guy called Ray Tomlinson in 1971, and he invented the @ symbol in the current format of the email address, and he didn't think anything of it at the time, but now it's nearly everywhere. We can learn probably quite a lot from email communication because the other social media tools out there now will also go through the same sort of growth and development. So email starts out being very basic. We now try to get email to do much more than it was actually invented for. And it's grown very organically. When email is installed within many organizations, you're not actually told or trained how to use it. There's email, get on and use it. Things have also changed in terms of legal requirements. So in terms of retention of documents. So if you mention anything to do with asbestos in an email, you've got to store that for 50 years. So no longer it's just a personal email going from one person to the next. We've got legal ramifications that we must start to store some of this information. And this might come in terms of social media, in terms of into organizations. The biggest change is what we call WETs, Work Extendable Technologies, and I haven't got mine on me, but mobile phones, iPads. I wonder how many people here are guilty of having their email on their phone, and just before they go to bed, they probably just look at their email. I'm looking at Bob to see if he does that. So you just check your email before you go to bed, and there'll be some tasks there which might keep you up all night because you start to worry about them. And we start to become much more addicted and needing to actually check our email. And we'll come on to that in more depth. We've done, I suppose the last 17 years, we've done a number of email studies looking at the email landscape. The latest one was the UK government agency. And as a PhD student, Laura, who did the work, and Jill supervised her as well with myself, and Mike Gleason helped us with all the processing of the cortisol samples. So we went to this UK government agencies. We had about just over 30 participants, some dropped out, and we monitored them. So they had a blood pressure monitor put on them for 24 hours a day, and they also, so you had your blood pressure and you had your heart rate. This is the unpleasant part. They had to spit into a test tube 6 times a day, and poor Laura then had to put that in the fridge and later freeze that to take it back to Loughborough to analyse it. Cortisol is your fight or flight. So when you come up against it, you need to draw upon your adrenaline, which then draws upon your cortisol. And your cortisol levels are very high in the morning, about 9 o'clock, and they decrease throughout the day to, they pretty much not depleted, but run right down towards the evening. They also did lots of questionnaires, and we also monitored them at the desk to find out what they're actually doing. And maybe it's not a shock, but what we did find is email does cause stress. So this chart here, left-hand side is the cortisol level, and underneath here is the time. So your cortisol levels start very high in the morning, like I said, and they decrease throughout the day. And the blue line is the email day. So they started very similar, but you can see they decrease more with the blue line, the email day, than the email free day, which pretty much higher than the blue line there. What we did notice, if people who were less stressed, employees were less stressed if they filed their emails away. So as they came into the inbox, the people that left them in the inbox were more stressed than the people that actually decided to fold them away. We also found that email isn't that bad compared to other devices like mobile phones, speaking of mobile phones, or face-to-face meetings. They all cause stress. It's just because the frequency of email and how we deal with it causes more stress. So I had an attempt here, talking to the RAs and the PhD students, I had my first attempt at doing an infographic, and they're much harder than I thought, as you can probably tell. So here are all the email facts, and I tried to put them into just one infographic, so 17 years worth of work and just half a page. It's quite sad, really. So the pie chart here on the right-hand side, let's do some analysis of an inbox. You can see the green, 15% of your inbox requires action. 39% of your inbox is just information only at the top here. So it doesn't need to be delivered by email. 29% is unnecessary, so it's carbon copy, and we all hate those reply to all. It happens a lot, I think, in every department, that you always get the reply to all and they didn't realise how to use email. And then there's 17% that are irrelevant. So if you think about your makeup of your inbox, really far too much information is going into your email account, and we could really reduce that. We did a study at the Downward Group many years ago looking at interrupt recovery time, and we discovered that people do seem to be addicted to email. So staff react to email, the majority of staff react to email within 6 seconds of it arriving, which is incredible. So you're kind of like hovering over the icons at the bottom, waiting to see if an email comes in. Oh, that's much more interesting than work. Let's go and see what the email says. You look like you're guilty there, Angus. And then, so as soon as you go to email, you deal with email, you get back into the work you were doing. It then takes 64 seconds for you to get back into the work you were doing before the email interruption. Now, that's far better than Tom DeMarco's finding when it comes to telephone interrupts, which they say it takes 10 to 15 minutes to get back into your work after a telephone interruption. So email is not so bad. The problem we have is that potentially, when the old systems, you used to check for email, the default was to check for email every 5 minutes. So if you had a new email coming in a working day, you could potentially have like 96 interruptions in a day. So if one comes in every 5 minutes and you process it, you've only got 3.5 minutes before your next interruption. If every new email is a new task and you can't close that task down, that starts to build up. And the brain can only deal with between 8 and 15 tasks at any one time. So over that, you're starting to become overloaded. So at the bottom here, the sign of overload, here is productivity is reduced. When you leave the office in the evening, you feel quite fatigued, your creativity goes, and the quality of work decreases. And the sign of that is in the middle there. So 87% of staff that we surveyed over loads of different organisations, we won't mention them all, suffer from email overload. So it is a big issue. 1 in 3, this is the worrying one, are email dependent. So I don't know if you take away their BlackBerry or their computer, what happens if they go into meltdown. I don't know. We didn't go that far, but it's interesting. 53% cannot deal with email anymore. Just find too much. They don't have time to do the work anymore. So it's a big problem. We looked at trying to solve this problem, so we did lots of seminar-based training. So we get lots of employees into the classroom, teach them how to do better email. That worked for a time, and after a month, they would go back into their old habits, which are the bad habits. So we then came up with a computer-based training system, and we work with Anne on this, and Martin, called REMS, which is the ranking of email management styles. This is a system that we started to roll out across the university, and it's also going out to EasyJet and WWF. You're probably thinking what wrestling want with an email system. No, it's the Wildlife Foundation that are using it. What it does is it looks at your email usage. So it looks at how good you are at writing an email. It looks at how you manage your inbox. And finally, are you addicted to email? It will then, so if you send off your outbox to the system, it then gives you a score and ranks you within the university to see how good you are. Bob, your secret's safe with me. So what we want to know, if you're going to move it forward, is can we determine how good we are at processing information? So it's no good just doing one size fits all, you should only have so many email. Could we actually break it down and look at the factors that contribute to information overload? And we started a bit of work about this about 2 years ago, maybe probably a little bit longer, and we came up with this. So this is an information overload model. Ideally, we'd like to make it into a mathematical formula, but we're not quite there yet. So on the left-hand side, this is, you've got not overloaded, overloaded, and the tipping point in the middle. So the left-hand side, you have a bit more control over. On the right-hand side, you have less control. So let's quickly whip through these. So the first one is the quality of information. So how complex is the information you're trying to process? The ambiguity level, how novel and how uncertain it is. That's the first factor. Next one is processing capacity. So in here, we all have brains that can process things or information differently. So mathematically or literacy might be different. So the speed you can do it changes from person to person. The other one is available time. So if you had all the time in the world, you could probably complete most tasks within a business environment, but we don't have all the time in the world. Quantity of information, so there might not be much out there on the web, which could be a good thing, but then what's the quality like? So if the quantity's low and the quality's poor, where are you going to get your information from to complete the task? It makes it much harder. Then you've got the task. How novel is the task that you've seen before? Have you seen it before? Are you multitasking, being interrupted all the time? Finally, the personal factors. So I think maybe you've had a row with your partner the night before and your mind's not quite on the task that you're trying to complete. So they're all the different factors that make up potentially information overload. And with the students, I think this is always quite dry, so we try to bring it to life. And what I want to try and do tonight, this could fail miserably, but we'll give it a go anyway, is a simulation of helicopters. Here we have a helicopter, a pilot, over a very densely populated city. So tonight you're going to be the densely populated city when we're going to fly the helicopters. And this is what it looks like, a cockpit. And what we're going to simulate is what happens. So we're going to have two volunteers, which are pre-selected, so there's no pressure. So we've got Becca and Paul. Have they disappeared? Where are they? Do you want to come on down? Have they disappeared? No, they are coming. Whew. So our job is to try and keep these helicopters in the air. And on the computer, we're going to simulate going through a helicopter when it hits problems. And we'll see at the end who can keep them in the air and who can't. Okay, so guys, are we nearly ready to take off? Yeah? You ready? Okay, so we'll start. Oh, have we crashed already, have we? So I'm trying to get mine. Right. Oh, we've got some crashes already. So as we're going, the helicopter starts to hit some problems. So as the pilot, I'm starting to think, how do I fix this problem? So the buzzer's going, lots of things are going through my mind. This doesn't feel particularly good. Should I get the manual out and start to look? Should I look in Google? How do I fix this particular problem? I've got pictures of my family going around in my head. I'm not really concentrating on the task. It seems to be going a bit funny. Am I taking you out, Becca? And then suddenly, it all stops. Bit of light entertainment. Great. Thanks, guys, for that. So the outcome is, we talk about office environments, information overload, you deal with it, don't you? But if you are a pilot, and I hope these or myself to actually become pilots after what we've just done there, it can be fatal. You either land correctly or you don't. But going through that, in terms of us trying to simulate here, you're going through very much, you're looking at us, we're trying to process this, how novel was the environment, how novel was it to fly the helicopter. We can start to maybe model and start to predict if you're likely to suffer from information overload. So we talked about using social media and what it's used for, and we looked at email as an example of if it's not used correctly, how it can actually start to affect you. Now I want to look at what is your data that you're feeding into the network used for. So if I said, what if you could determine the emotions of an audience watching a TV program? So you think something like if you heard about the X Factor, that's where people sing, it's a real live show, could you get real information back in real time about these acts? And if they're any good or any bad, if they're not very good and if viewing factors are being affected, could you change them real time to put something more entertaining on? What about if you knew about the emotions going into a commercial break? So if you knew the emotions of the audience watching, could you develop or commission an advert for specific emotions to tap into them so they can help sell a service or a product? You think about, I think Red Nose Day is coming up March 17th, something like that. When they're showing those video clips of the children in Africa, how long should they keep those clips on for? If you start to know the emotions, and at what point people will start to pick up the phone and donate some money. Well, that all comes from, and potentially could be done, by using all your data out there. We had a project funded by the Ministry of Defence and EPSRC from the Research Council, or part of the Research Council, called Emotiv, and this is it. And what it does, in simple terms, we could use any social media tool, but we chose Twitter because it's very easy to get hold of tweets. So we want to take a tweet and then see, is there any emotion related to that particular tweet? And we came up with 8 different emotions in the end, and they're cross-cultural. So we had fear, sadness, which you can see at the very bottom here, anger, confusion, disgust, happiness, shame, and surprise. Now, tonight we're only going to show you the really shiny bits. We're not going to show you, and we wouldn't want to show you how it all works, the integral parts of it, but there is a lot of natural language processing. So it's taking natural language, and we're trying to get the computer to understand that. And on top of that, we have what's called an ontology, which is kind of like a map of words. And it shows how words relate to other words. So, for example, anger, we have about 100 words in the ontology, different words that represent anger. We also have intensifiers, so you can be very angry, very sad. And that then gives you a score for potentially each tweet. Now that can be very powerful. And I'll give you an example why after this slide. So why bother looking at any social media? What does it actually tell us? Well, if you remember the uprising, Egyptian activists, we used Facebook to schedule our protest, Twitter to coordinate, and YouTube to tell the world. Social media also can break the news first. So we had Mumbai attacks in 2008, 2009 Jakarta bombings, earthquakes in Japan, all reported first by our social media. So this comes back to you guys feeding into the network. And it's not just us creating Emotiv, there are other commercial people out there trying to do it. So here, I won't mention them all, but they're all here at the bottom. Currently, our Emotiv system is the best in the world at determining fine-grained emotion, so no other system gets close to it. The problem we do have with any tweets is sarcasm. So I don't know if you remember the megabus incident on the M6. From memory, I think it was an e-cigarette. There's some passages on the megabus. Something was vaporized and it looked like some sort of chemical warfare. A passenger then on the megabus phoned the emergency services, and all this happened here. And I think it was great. These two comments. Watching the news in Tesco, I was a bit confused about what's happened on the M6 toll road. This, for me, is sarcasm. 2001, terrorists hijacked planes. 2012, terrorism alert on a megabus on the M6 toll. This recession has hit hard. So for a computer to try and understand that, it's difficult. Let me take you back a few years to Woolwich, and I think you probably all can remember the brutal killing of soldier Lee Rigby. This system was quite important for law enforcement agencies to be developed, because if you remember the London riots, can you start to predict when a riot might happen? So the Emotiv system was monitoring the Lee Rigby event. So you can see here the percentage of emotions on the left-hand side, the different colours on the right-hand side, you can see there, and the timeline at the bottom. So if we highlight or move into two of the colours there, which are sadness and disgust. So you can see they're moving along here, and what might they lead to? Who knows? You can actually drill in and look at the tweets. Could it lead to a riot? Nobody really knows until you gather more data. But what's interesting is you've got a big outburst of happiness. Why would you have happiness in such a sad situation? And how did it change the dynamics after that? Well, the happiness was to do with people being very proud of Woolwich, and also the wife of Lee Rigby coming out and saying some very nice words, which changed the whole dynamic of the event. Which maybe I find a little bit scary, because if law enforcement agencies are starting to use this, no longer do you have to send out troops or police. Maybe it's just a war of words that you can start to change feelings via social media. What about products? So we looked some time ago at the iPhone S and iPhone C. Martin did some great job on the graphics here and the analysis. So the S was the more expensive one, the C was the cheap one. You can see generally there's a lot more happiness on the S, the more expensive one, than the cheap one. If you put it into a bar chart, you will see, if you're doing this, Apple doing this again, the cheap one, people aren't so happy with. A lot of anger, confusion, and in terms of happiness, not so high, a lot of sadness. So if you're trying to develop a product, maybe you would start thinking about real-time monitoring a product or service to get real-time feedback, which then could change. You could go out there and be proactive and try and make the customers that have bought a very cheap one that hasn't got the functionality better somehow by maybe developing a new service or an app they could release. We are using the Emotiv engine for, it's a working title, I should add, called Vote B. So running up to the general election, we're going to launch a free and a fee app, and it will track the emotions of the public towards politicians, parties and policies. So it'd be interesting to see what people think of Farage and see if there's sadness, happiness, we don't know, but it'd be quite interesting to see. So that will be launched soon. This is the bit, I suppose, we've done email for 17 years, and throughout that we've done lots of, as a team, we've done lots of things. And the thing that interests me and really gets me going in the morning at the moment is the embedded intelligence side, but it also has a bit of a scary element to it. Been working with Andy and Paul and Will and Chris and Lisa on this, and the guys have developed a system, a board, which has sensors on. So it could have temperature sensor, it could have vibration sensor. You could pretty much have any sensor you want. And then it's linked to an RFID tag that then gives that information out to the outside world, which is the interesting thing. So you could put this, the tags, the embedded intelligence tags, into pretty much any components in any car. So if you took your car in to have its brake calipers changed, and they change them in the garage, you could go and get back into your car, turn on your ignition, and it'd say, these are not the recommended brake calipers from this manufacturer. If you continue, you're going to invalidate your warranty. So you could go back and look, hang on guys in the garage, this is wrong. I asked for the premium product, you've not given it to me. Or you know that's the case, and you think, fine, invalidate my warranty, I don't care. But what it does give you Also, from the manufacturer's point of view, you can see how that new component works with the other components in the car. So you're getting real-time information back, the impact of that component on other components. What it also does in the future, you don't have to go on gocompare.com and get all the emails from them anymore, because we will know, I say we know, it doesn't have to be in cars, how you're driving your car. So it gets how fast you've been driving, how violently, how the vibration, everything. So you can start to work out your car premiums. When it comes to recalling cars, you remember Toyota, and they did a big recall. Maybe you don't have to recall all the cars. You just need to recall the cars that you know are at danger. We've had a PhD student who's nearly finished called Mike Hurst, and he's been working with myself and Mashuda, and he's been looking at emotions. So looking at the face and trying to determine emotions, and looking at pupil size and also determine emotions. So we're also working with BMW on this. So if you could put that into a car, potentially you could start to work out the emotion of the driver in that car, which could lead to all sorts of things. So think about driving along the road, it knows you're in a happy mood, you come along, there's an advert board there, and it shows you a nice advert that taps into your happiness. You could also link it to your GPS, so you can find out which are the happy roads in the UK or the world, or the sad roads. But it's quite worrying that you can potentially share all this information with each other, I think. And it's that sort of question, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? But to make that happen, it's okay giving us all that information. You need to start to bring it all together. And this is the exciting bit. This is what's going to change a lot of things out there. So we heard about the semantic web and maybe the Internet of Things before. And we heard about ontologies. But I think ontologies really have not taken off necessarily because they lack so much information that needs to be in there. So an ontology looks pretty much like this. You have a car, okay, and a car has 3 wheels or has 4 wheels. Well, which one is it? Well, you have to build another ontology to show that it's either 3-wheel or 4-wheel. It has no probability, an ontology. But you get the idea. It links things together, which is very nice. But what we want to try and do, and we've got pretty much along the way to getting there, is looking at the probabilities, having different modes so you can construct anything in ontology and have the probabilities. You can control anything via the ontology. You can do fault finding, simulation, prediction, and potentially self-healing. So it's bringing all that data together and having the ontology control everything. The hard one, and that's why it started, is the learning ontology. So whilst the ontology is out there in the real environment, how can you actually relate, or how do you actually add new nodes to an ontology without a human doing that? And that's very difficult. And yeah, we're nowhere near that at the moment. Real-time data. So you've got real-time data going into this ontology. So a good example would be a car crash. And you could work out from the embedded sensors what went wrong with the car, potentially. There's lots we could have done tonight, but I thought this is probably the nice one. Not that it's a car crash, but it's just a nice, simple one to look at. So in terms of the car crash, why did it fail? So you could look at the left-hand side. Is it 3 wheels? Is it 4 wheels? Did we have a blowout on one of the tyres? We could probably get that from one of the sensors. So probability was 4 wheels, but it probably wasn't a blowout. If you look here, so was it to do with the brakes? Well, probably not. Looking at the sensors, the information we got back from them, they're pretty normal. Was it to do with the fuel tank, some sort of surge in the fuel tank? No, probably wasn't to do with that. Hang on, let's have a look then. So was it to do with the driver from looking at the sensors within the car? Yes, we know it's not a computer, we know it's a human driver, again from the sensors. So then what caused the crash? Well, then we can start looking at maybe a bit of fuzzy logic in terms of, well, was it the processing capacity of the individual driving that car? So let's say well, I shouldn't do that, but we will. So if we say it's an old person driving a car, I think I can get away with it. Processing capacity might be good, but if you've got the grandchildren in the car, you've got your sat-nav talking to you, you've got the radio on, the chances are it's much harder to process the information, especially when maybe it's dark outside and it's snowing. So you still need a bit of fuzzy logic, but you can then start to determine from this, from the embedded sensors, using the ontology, what potentially caused a crash. So that is pretty much the way forward, I see, the next 2 to 3 years. But it's a lot of work to try and achieve that. So, trying to bring things pretty much to a close. I don't know if you find it scary or not, all this embedded intelligence, and you're one of the sensors feeding into the grid. But I did a lecture this morning to the first years, and they all thought it's absolutely fine, no problem. You can take all my data, you can use it. I have no problems with that. But talking to other people, I think the older generation, my generation, yes, I think we are a little bit scared about that. But you can see potential benefits. If you think about the Tesco club card, and if cancer research got together, that could be a powerful combination. You know exactly what a person's purchased, so you know their food, the fat intake, the salt intake, the sugar intake, maybe the chemicals they bought in terms of detergents, and then you can start to see, if you link that with cancer research data, can you see what might lead to cancer? So there's a benefit there, but then potentially you're starting to predict life expectancy. So premiums on life insurance is no longer a gamble. You know exactly what you're doing. Pensions, you know exactly where you sit with the pot of money because you know how long people will live. So the question for me is, how far do we want to go? It's not all bad news. Social media command centers now pop up. This is where companies, many hotels actually buy into these. They monitor everything you say on social media. So if you have something bad to say about a hotel chain, they'll be on it, saying, sorry sir, sorry to hear about this, what can we do to help? So it's creating jobs, it's good for the economy. So to conclude, really, remember we are just a sensor in this connected jungle, and we're feeding into this connected jungle, and I don't know if that's good or bad. But one thing we've got to do is make sure we have our own coping strategies. There's a wealth of information out there on a daily basis. How do we cope with all that information? How do you cope? So when you go home tonight and you sit and go to work tomorrow, are you going to change the way you deal with email? Are you going to start to think about, actually, most evenings I go home, I'm quite fatigued. Can I start to change that? Can you increase the quality of your life? I think it is an exceedingly exciting area to be working in, and it's rapidly growing, but we've got to shape it. And what I mean by that is, how far do we go with all this? How far do we go by bringing everything together and having one system that can control potentially everything? Now, we're many years off that, but we can eventually get there. So to finish on, just to prove a point really, is it's not you yet, Angus, hang on. There's a video I'd just like to show you, which I don't know if you've seen before. I think the quality might not be brilliant, but let's have a look. The computer's just thinking about it. Still thinking. Ah, it's a shame. Quality. Let's just check it's not in the wrong way. I think it's not. Well, what you would have seen is, which is probably a good thing really, is, let me just check it isn't there. It's worked before, but it's not working tonight. On this camera, on this helicopter, there is an actual camera. And what I wanted to show you is that we have had all your faces tonight on here on the video, which sometimes, again, it comes down to ethics. Do you know you're actually being recorded, and what's your data going to be used for? So unfortunately, you're all safe, and your faces are not on the video tonight. Oh, damn. It's worked every other day, but not today. There we go. Anyway, thank you for coming tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.